Here comes Brian Foley. Hello, Brian Foley. All right, welcome everybody to a Common Sense reading series. My name is Jordan Stempelman. For those of you who are attending for the first time, I began the series in 2011 here in Kansas City, Missouri. Since the pandemic, I have gone remote. I will continue to host a series remote in the spring, and then I'm thinking about doing some type of hybrid in the fall of 2022 and the spring of 2023, because it affords me the chance to have readers in the series who might not be able to travel out, like tonight, having Mark and Justin here. So this event and all the events this season were made possible by generous contributions from the creative writing program at the Kansas City Art Institute. I've archived past readings at my website, so check those out. They're great. And sometime in the next few days, I will post this video as well. Let me go ahead and put a link in the chat to my website so you can check out those readers. Do know that before I introduce Mark and Justin, that I've reserved time after they read for like a 15-minute Q&A. So while the readers are reading or immediately following the reading, please feel free to type your questions into the comment box, and I will read those questions to the readers. They can probably see them too. And feel free to use the reaction emojis at any point in time during the readings. Participate in the chat, and let me make sure no one else is in the waiting room, and we will get started. All right. Our first reader is Mark Leidner. Mark Leidner is the author of 2 books of poetry. His most recent, Returning the Sword to the Stone from Phonograph. Beauty Was the Case That They Gave Me came out with Factory Hollow in 2011. He's written a book of aphorisms, The Angel and the Dream of Our Hangover from $2 Books, also in 2011. He's written a short story collection, Under the Sea, from Tyrant Books in 2018. And he's written 2 feature films, the sci-fi thriller Empathy Inc., which came out in 2019, and the relationship comedy Jammed 2014. He now lives in California. He's originally from Georgia. Mark and I realized that we've now known each other for roughly 15 years, which is, I don't even know what to do with that. But we're both moving into the future. I'm so excited to have Mark here tonight.
Thank you, Jordan. Thank you all for coming and for logging in, whatever. It's really nice to read with Justin again. It's our 2nd time reading together, and my only 3rd time reading on the internet. So 2 out of 3 with Justin. He also, his last name is Marks. There's 2 Marks, essentially. That's kind of cool. What else? 15 years, Jordan. It's funny, you meet certain poets at certain times in your life when you're like just growing or reverse growing, just struggling to become whatever you are. And Jordan is like one of like maybe 20 people that they're like poets that I met at a very formative moment, who I think about constantly. I haven't talked to Jordan and I haven't talked to him in many years, but because we were like in 2 or 3 classes together for 3 years or 2 years, I feel like I know him on a deep, like marrow level, even though I know almost nothing about his real life, because I feel like I got like that X-ray that poetry gives you, or can give you. And so, I don't know, many of the people on here, Hillary, Emily, Hannah, and Jordan, Dara, I think about you guys all the time, even if I'm, as if we're like neighbors still, or, so it's nice to have that feeling just has been consistent for 15 years, even though we've shared very few emails anyway. Or not very few emails, many emails sometimes. So I'm going to read some of these poems from this new book, came out in February of this year, Returning the Sword to the Stone. And I'm going to start a timer so I don't read too long or too short. I'll start with a short one. Many of these poems are supposed to be funny, at least a little bit. So it's hard to kind of, sometimes you read a poem cold, it's supposed to be sort of funny, but people don't understand that maybe it's okay to laugh. And this is not even live face to face. So it's even more of a confusing issue. Even if everyone was laughing or no one was laughing, I probably wouldn't know. So I just want you to have the best experience possible in your own room. So this is called Opening Day. If they ever really did clone dinosaurs and built a real Jurassic Park, it would be funny if a tiny little asteroid arrived and destroyed only it. Here's the only other short poem in the book. Church. Whenever I go back to church as an adult, I gnaw a little on the pew in front of me, like I'm a beaver trapped in human form. And the wood tastes exactly the same as it did when I was a child, and I am comforted. This poem is a little longer. It's, I guess, maybe the only prose poem in the book. It's kind of like a style of poem that I sometimes do, which is like a manic prose monologue, which is different than when you break it into lines somehow. A lot of this is called The Truth About Wizards. A lot of books recently have been written about how magic is real and some children are born with its powers. In such stories, they only need to be whisked off to some magic academy and trained to use those powers. Then, after a few quaint tribulations, they're heroes. Then they live on as wizards in a magical world, or as wizards masquerading as normal people in an unmagical reality, perhaps using magic here and there to save either the real world or the wizard world, but always from something at least as equally magical but evil. If you happen to be a fan of such stories, I'm sorry. That's not at all how it works. In the real world, everyone is a wizard without knowing it, and all children attend wizard academies without being told that's what they are. And there is no big unveiling where you finally learn you're a wizard and start doing magic. You just never find that out. You're raised by wizard parents who you don't know are wizards. You attend a wizard school that you don't know is for wizards, and everything you learn is magic, but you do not recognize it as such. You live your whole life as a wizard who does not know they are a wizard in possession of powers you do not recognize as magic. The moment you believe you can actually do magic or that magic is real, you're kicked out of wizard school and your powers are stripped, and you're forced to live the rest of your life knowing magic is real, but that you're not a wizard anymore, and that all the other people who don't know magic is real remain real wizards. Here's a lot of the poems in this book are kind of like thematically nerd adjacent, or I guess what used to be called nerd, but now is not, is just mainstream. Maybe, I don't know. But, wizards and magic and like medieval fantasy, sci-fi stuff. So this one's sort of like that. At least parts of it are. This is 8 things I hate about me. I hate it when I spend my life breeding and training elite sled dogs, only to end up the crusty old villain in some younger musher's story. I hate it when I'm giving an academic talk at my alma mater and my old mentor is a no-show, causing me to question the value of my scholarship. I hate it when I humiliate a nerd in the lunchroom or bathroom, only for them to become cool later, humiliating me at a house party or a school dance. I hate it when I'm trying to avoid seeing a dive bar right behind me, just as the last city bus barrels by in the rain, reflecting in its strip of moving windows the dive bar's neon signage. I hate it when I spend my youth decrying the hypocrisies of adults, only to become one who conceives of hypocrisy as the very pinion of consciousness. I hate it when I plant a kiss on each bicep in a dive bar, mocking a dock worker, mocking a dock worker with biceps twice mine in diameter into arm wrestling me, only to be all the more humiliated when I lose. I hate it when I fall off my yacht and the weight of all the mobile gaming consoles in my cargo shorts pockets pins me to the seafloor. I hate it when I'm in geometry class, intent on disrupting a lesson with inane and off-topic contributions, only to be moved to silence by the beauty of the Pythagorean theorem. This next poem, as Jordan mentioned, I wrote a book that's kind of mostly, hi Brian. Oh, Brian, you're in San Francisco. Wow, we're pretty close. Anyway, this next poem is Jordan mentioned one of the books that I've written is like mostly aphorisms or is all aphorisms, but I was going to try to write another book of them, but I didn't have enough good ones to have a whole book. And so I just put them in. There's 2 poems in this book that are all just aphorisms. So this is called Youth is a Fugitive. And the title goes into the first line in case that's not clear. Youth is a fugitive that thinks it's a hostage. You know the labyrinth has 2 exits if you can feel the wind. Hell is an orgy of everyone you know, heaven an orgy of strangers. Just the faint glimmer of the possibility of love instantly gerrymanders your entire past. An exotic analogy to which no one relates, but to which people wish they related, will always outcirculate an actually apt analogy to which people actually relate. A child surprised that a neon sign isn't hot the first time they touch one knows how it feels as an adult to achieve one's goals. The amount of muffin left stuck to the wrapper when you open it is the percent of your childhood that was the way you remember it. Crime is a dream justice has when it sleeps. Boredom is the cruelest aphrodisiac. All you need is love to have a home in every moment, and all you need is poetry to have it be a mansion. Desire rudders a ghost ship. Believing in God is like believing in an endless stream of letters following Z. Loving anything more than yourself is like a misquote that clears you of plagiarism. Cowardice is the fear of suffering, courage the fear of wrongdoing. Nothing is purer than gratitude, and because it's so pure, it's the first thing to blow away when the wind blows. Anything is impossible. Excuse me, anything is possible, but everything is too expensive. History is stranger than truth or fiction. The eyes are teeth that see. Grace is a diaper you never have to change. Mourning a more convincing dream. Life is long for a brief time. then brief for a long time. The problem with irony is that it is too soothing. It suggests a pattern to tragedy and therefore mitigates the terror that tragedy is random. Were tragedy patternless, we'd be meaningless, and all the ironies of literature are a dam against this despair. This next poem, I'm going to read some sonnets. There's 10 sonnets in this poem. I'm not going to read them all, but I'm going to read like 3 or 4. And they're really not sonnets in any, and they have 14 lines and they rhyme, but it's really kind of the 2 least important things about a sonnet. So, are they sonnets? This is a great sequence if you love and asking that question. It's not even about the sonnet for me. I don't even think that's an interesting question. Are they sonnets? But I like how, I like to write individual lines that have no other meaning or context, and then try to come up with ways to arrange them so that they can flow together and bounce off of each other. And so the sonnet, in quotation marks, was kind of like sort of a shape that helped that happen. Anyway, here they are. Shark hunting with American flag colored chum, a gavel hammering a grain of sand, a cannibal choking to death on a thumb, an hourglass on the witness stand, art supplies stuffed into torpedo tubes, a Monet frisbeed into the sea, Mars and the moon terraformed into cubes, a Rubik's cube growing on a grapefruit tree, a warehouse full of moldy fedoras, a border only a moron would close, a shark moralizing to its remoras, a scarecrow torn by empathy for crows, centaurs playing kickball well, water boiling in the toilets of hell. The 10 Commandments in 10 different fonts, a solar system with a $sign star, hell with really good restaurants, the Holy Spirit in a driverless car, shag carpeting on the steps of a ladder, the privilege in which indifference is coded, a happy song that makes you sadder, a pill that makes you think you voted, billionaires playing chicken in yachts, brinksmanship between a species and its niche, dogs playing fetch with astronauts on the moon and the moon on a leash, concrete leaves no one can rake, a border wall around a birthday cake, a hurdle that rises just as you jump. This is the third one starting, sorry. A hurdle that rises just as you jump, the Grand Canyon leveled off with caulk, the Statue of Liberty taking a dump, a crossbow loaded with a celery stalk, a magic beanstalk that scrubs CO2, syringes full of Christmas tree sap, medical bees that sting cures into you, an apocalypse so satisfying you clap, celebrities offering $15,000 hugs, a menage a trois between 3 U's, a curse where you shrug if anyone shrugs, a giant hourglass with a lit fuse, a painting of heaven in a barbed wire frame, a rendezvous that leaves you the same. This is the last sonnet, and then I'll read one more. Okay. Technophobes worshiping a crucified drone, a painting of heaven on a bowling pin, Beethoven butchered on a xylophone, a coma no one can prove they're not in, a superpower cowed by a rube, a pseudo-intellect you can't turn off, a powdered wig on a Rubik's Cube, a boy band eating salad from a trough, and everything bagel flavored scone, honey mustard stains on a treasure map, icebergs made of frozen cologne, amnesia in the middle of a victory lap, an emperor lamenting the mutability of signs, a bazooka that shoots Proust's Madeleines. I feel like when I'm reading that poem, which has only happened 3 times, as I said, over Zoom or since the pandemic in a digital context, my voice takes on this like Will Shortz explaining a puzzle to somebody on like Weekend Edition. And I don't really like that. I don't like the tone, but it is to me one of the clearest ways to present the material. So what are you gonna do? Okay, last poem, and this is Plague Blessing. It's kind of like the tone is a little more serious. And this is also the last poem I wrote in this book, and it's about the pandemic, or it was the only one I can say is directly inspired by these COVID times, or really any current event. Plague Blessing. Panic disorientation in the pre-dawn gray. We steep the tea 3 times before throwing it away. It is certain that every landscape vanishes into uncertainty. It is impertinent how therapeutic sunlight feels on the face. The last generation to remember meeting people before the internet, birthing the last one to remember when strangers could touch. The worst thing I can think of is that as long as suffering gets worse in the future, the suffering of the past becomes so instructive you can almost be glad that it happened, since without its lessons, the suffering to come might be unendurable. And so you almost crave more suffering, for if more suffering comes after that, more suffering before it becomes your only preparation or possible salvation. And yet, if suffering doesn't worsen, if suffering relents, then earlier suffering becomes comparatively pointless. If suffering only subsides, then one would have been better off without suffering earlier at all. And one is doomed then, it seems, to drag the negative fruits of all previous suffering endlessly forward, no matter how great or how small, sullying the lessening of suffering of which a future can sometimes be made. Every day you die a little more, but up until the moment you actually die, you're infinitely young. Since I'm not connected to or affected by their suffering, I will go out and spend time among them, versus since I am connected to and affected by their suffering, I will not go out and spend time among them. Grief doesn't break your heart, it expands it. It breaks your brain. Nature's whispered gibberish is suddenly intimate. Every new movie you view is the sequel to the last movie you saw and the prequel to the next one you will see. One cinematic saga per person per lifetime is created, curated continually, with each new movie viewed no differently than a poet choosing the word that comes after the previous word and before each subsequent word until the poem is concluded. May wisdom's sweet, resplendent light sweep the darkness and pain from the plane of your striving cognition. May the cradle of nothingness hold the wilderness of you in its furious sway. May you weep with the numinous delirium of those reborn who were born before. Thank you. And yeah, throw some questions in the chat if you got any. Over to Jordan.
Mark, that was so great to hear you read again. Thank you so much. That line, a curse when you shrug when anyone else shrugs, I thought is a curse that I feel like I've been cursed with, but that I don't feel that curse when I hear you read. It's something about I want to find ways to find these combinations that have yet to be combined. when I hear you read. Those things that are out there that need to find each other. You're like a matchmaker of lost things.
Thank you, Jordan.
So yeah, that was great. That was really wonderful. Thank you so much. Our next reader is going to be Justin Marks. And I was thinking about this too. Justin came through town, I think maybe in that first year when I started this series, and so this has been a long journey, and it's so great to hear him again. Justin Marks is the author of the book, The Come Down, which came out by Publishing Genius in 2021. He's also the author of You're Going to Miss Me When You're Bored from Barrel House in 2014, and also a million in prizes from New Issues in 2009. You can find recent work in Conduit and Iterant. He's also a co-founder of the magnificent small press Birds LLC. If you guys aren't familiar with Birds LLC, please check them out. Justin and his cohort and his compatriots have really brought some of the most dynamic poetry written right now into the world, and I'm so grateful for him and for them for doing that. And he lives in New York City with his family. So whenever you're in New York City, go find yourself some Justin Marks. Please welcome Justin Marks.
Everyone, thank you, Jordan. Thank you, Mark. That was such a great reading. When you were talking about how long you've known Jordan, I remembered I have known Jordan probably, see, my kids are 12. So I had this memory of one of the, I think early on we met each other. We were at AWP, and it was the first one I went to since my kids were born. So they were probably like a year old, and my wife called with like we were standing outside waiting for a reading, probably a little bit drunk. And my wife called with some I think my daughter had like a really bad diaper rash, and she was, I don't know, whatever it was. And I just I don't know how it happened, but I turned to Jordan. I was like, yeah, this is going on. He's like, this is what you do. You call your wife back, you say this, you do this. I was like, oh, okay, cool. I was just like at a total loss because I was, someone put in the chat, it might have been Chicago. You slather on paste. Yes. Yeah. So anyway, my kids they're twins. They're 12 now. So that had to be at least 10 or 11 years ago. Cool. And Mark, there was so many great things in that reading, but the one that really got me was grief doesn't break your heart, it expands it. That hit home extra hard. So thank you for that. Thank you, everyone, for joining. This is only my second reading on the internet, and it's also my second reading with Mark Leidner. So I guess I just have to do readings with him from now on the internet. So yeah, my book is called The Come Down, and it came out in 2021. It was supposed to come out in 2020, but then 2020 did what it did, and we delayed it for a year, which was good. And I have to give a special shout out to Adam at Publishing Genius. He's amazing, very patient, very just, willing to work with me through everything and on everything. So it came out, and it's out now. And I guess the only thing you have to really know about it is there's no titles. It's all one big poem or a series of untitled poems. There's some regular poems, and there's some prose poems. And I think it was me trying to sort of understand and start to put behind me a whole period of my life from essentially about 2 years old up until when I wrote it, which was in my, I guess, yeah, in my 40s. I'm in my later mid 40s at this point. So anyway, that's enough talking. I will read. And try and keep an eye on the time as well, because I don't know how to prepare for these things anymore. So I just chose a bunch of poems that felt right. So I have no idea if I will go long or not. So give me a drag off the stage if you need to. And yeah, I don't think, there might be some funny ones, and there are funny ones in the book. I don't know if there are any tonight. I've been in kind of a heavy mood lately. So I went with that. As a person, I'm a fiction, a heart of vomit, huge amounts of protein, scared, sacred. The difference is simple transposition, getting high in bathrooms, applying for jobs. Everything I do for approval. Continuous movement, a need beyond my ability. People want things to end, but not really, not like forever. Go down on history, I say. I mean, in. Go different ways. The options are limitless, says my horoscope. There are these memories I've been trying to figure out what to do with. Like when I was a kid out looking for things to shoot with my BB gun, and I saw a baby bird in a nest in the rafter of our barn with its neck stretched out, mouth open, waiting for its mother to return with food. I shot it. Its little cheeks slowed, then stopped, as if merely its batteries had run down. And I turned back to the house, nauseous with shame, to pretend it never happened. The only way I know to write is to read. What I like about that is the different words I get to use, that I get to change, the murkiness of who or what it is I'm praying to. You people who set rules for yourselves and follow them, how do you do that? I express gratitude, expect love and praise, get pissed when I don't get it, see people being happy and act incredulous. Little explosions that keep the engine going, pain that lingers long after the wound is inflicted. You amaze me. I never know what to believe. One of my first memories is being taken for a ride on my father's motorcycle, a Triumph. I was 2, maybe 3. We rode around our large rural yard. It was raining. There was no front fender, so the rain and mud sprayed up on our faces. My father sat me in front of him and held me with his legs. He had mounted a bracket on the gas tank for me to hold on to. When we came back in the house, he helped me take off my wet shoes and my mother removed my dirty clothes. Neither of them remembers any of this. Each of us our own unreliable narrator. Excuse me. Memoirs are just memories, my uncle once told me. What do we do with the things we forget? He's a combat veteran, has seen more people killed than he can remember. He has killed. He knows these things, but that doesn't change the lives and deaths he knows he has forgotten. Keep looking for reality, says Janie in Kathy Acker's Blood and Guts in high school. You'll drive yourself crazier and crazier. Shame on you, says my life coach. If every single moment you're not thinking, what's next? I don't have a life coach, but if I did and she gave me that advice, I might fire her or give her a raise. I don't know. Somewhere in the scribble of my signature is my name, my stiff body, my sour stomach. I hold my body wrong and live in pain. My pain amuses me. There's my intention, and then there's what happens. First thought, worst thought is the first thought I have every morning. Trust issues galore. Fear has been a great motivator for me, I'm told. So ready to be wronged, ill prepared for any weather. When I'm alone, I'm most relaxed. Escape from self that asserts the self all the more strongly. Water that takes its root. To sit and talk makes me extremely nervous. Good behavior is thinking of all the horrible things I could do and then not doing them. Ambition is stupid. Nothing's as bad as I thought it would be. The house is quiet. I'm alone. My hearing is attuned to the slightest sound of openings, ready to begin, which is what I like doing best, beginning, before the desperate fear of work sets in, the pretense of honesty, cloud millions. Self-diagnosis, patient, that's me, suffers from continuous disruption of circadian rhythms, whacked out fantasies, all the different ways to go with this, steps to unwind, average existence in which my self-loathing knows no end, struggle for connection, the kind of thing that keeps going. Like Lil Wayne in the 12-page, 35-minute rap that was the end of everything he'd written. Now it's all freestyle, a beat and whatever comes to mind, a middle-aged white dude, me, talking about 21st century hip hop. An individual moving at a constant velocity, matching its direction to that of its neighbors within a certain radius. List all your character defects, the promises go, and you'll find freedom, peace, and happiness, love, and be well loved. What a mess. We're such a fucking mess. Candy that tastes like weekdays. When things get emotional, the fluids flow, the blood and the grief. A flip from the throng to an organized swarm. I look nothing like I feel in pictures. But please, don't make me get naked. You wouldn't like me when I'm naked. Yes. Fun is embarrassing. Booze and anger, my only release. The abusive impulses of a traumatized self. A need for control. Strict narratives, definite meanings, imagined perfection. The self-satisfying terror of watching it all crumble. Confirmation of my own inadequacy. What makes me feel worse makes me feel better. A struggle with abstraction, tightness in my shoulders. For years, I was drunk or hungover, drunk and hungover, so tired. Tired and neglectful, about to throw up or pass out, explode in barely tamped down anger. Here's a couple really short ones. Everyone is someone to be afraid of. Every noise, a potential disaster. I've become who I am, a storyline taking shape, text becoming body, pain and love and disappointment. How much I can take and give, not give up. The future terrifies. Care is a mammal emotion. Last night, I dreamt I was Captain America shitting himself. Today, the Imperial theme from Star Wars blares from my neighborhood firehouse. You look really sad, a stranger handing out flyers to a comedy show says to me. According to the book I'm reading, the universe is a finite thing growing into something infinite if you're willing to wait an eternity. We all mean well, I guess. Every child terrifies. When we first brought them home, I would hold either of my twin babies and wonder, if they died, where would they go? To think I would go nowhere when I died was fine. To think they would too was impossible. They were so little, just days old. Their existence so strange and wonderful and new, too perfect to endure. I'd recently seen a movie, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, in which the title character ages backwards. The filmmakers went all the way with it, took Benjamin back to when he was a baby, and in one of the final scenes, while his ex-lover and now caretaker is holding him, the infant Button closes his eyes peacefully as if he were just going to sleep, but really he dies. Or perhaps my preoccupation with death was a way to try and read, to comprehend those first days of parenthood. The kind of reading Mary Ruefle says is an extension of time, and in which you, quote, die and watch those you love die until the very dizziness of it all becomes a source of compassion for ourselves and for the language we created, unquote. Language, my children, my death obsession, a desire, Ruefle might say, to make everything okay. I'm going to read two more, and I think I'm going to come in just about out of time, which I'm a little bit, I'm one of those people that's like not just punctual, I'm early. Like I cannot relax until I'm where I need to be, and then I can relax. So time is maybe a slightly extra burden for people like that. I don't know, it seems to be. I'm learning the faith that it might all be okay, that hopelessness and death are okay, states of existence over which we have little control. It's all part of the treatment, the etymology of story, the words that often escape me, meta experience that competes with the experience, minor versions of disastrous behavior. Everybody wants to be better, but nobody has a baseline for understanding themselves. God, angels. I'm no longer opposed to those words. I'm not sure what that means. The brakes burning up when we try to slow down, post-apocalyptic chic after the real apocalypse. Look at me like I'm important. I'm neither important, nor should you look at me. My ill-fitting clothes, all the words it takes to figure out what doesn't need to be said. So last one, and thanks again, everybody. Thank you, Jordan and Mark and everyone who's listening. It's been a great way to spend a still pandemic Saturday evening. Things happen. The story evolves. We're in a church basement. I'm sober. The kids are participating in their first drama club, singing and dancing and acting and playing imaginary instruments. In a moment, they will all, meaning all the kids in the drama class, sing, "Sit down, you're rocking the boat." They, meaning my kids, have completed their first full week of kindergarten. They seem happy. They like school, they say. We love it, they say, which makes me feel good. I don't remember liking school. I remember an older kid I worshiped named Todd said he didn't like school, and so I decided to not like it either. I remember being scared and nervous and uncomfortable and certain I was stupid. When they're done singing the song and the show is over, my son wants me to carry him. My daughter wants me to carry her. I resist because they're heavy and it's hot and I'm lazy, but then remember, they're 5.5 years old. Soon neither will want to be carried and I will miss when they did, which is this moment. In the future, I will miss this moment. So I carry them one at a time, alternating each from one block to the next until I'm tired, put them down and say, you're big kids now, you can walk on your own. Which is true, but I wasn't that tired. I could have carried them further. Thanks.
Thanks, Justin. That was phenomenal. We all mean well, I guess, and I think that whenever I hear you read, I feel that you totally mean well, and there's an incredible amount of meaning in what you're going back to or what you're paying attention to. So I've got some questions. I got a couple of just, not rando questions by any means. Just questions I just selfishly want to hear you both answer. And then if anyone in the chat wants to ask questions, please put them in there. I'll give, about 15 minutes or 20 minutes for this to happen, depending on how it goes. No one's going to turn the house lights out on us. No last calls. But I want to respect everyone's time. So let me figure out how to do this because I want to add some spotlights here. There we go. Is that happening? Are you guys spotlighted? Can you see? All right. Maybe I'll. Oh, look, there I am too. Okay. So here's one question I have. If you all were to compare poetry to something, what would that something be? And this is kind of, I was thinking of Mark's poems, how he's always in this amazing kind of metaphoric space. But I'm wondering, what would you compare poetry to? Because I find that's something people always say, why poetry? Why would you write poetry when you can, do X or Y? But what would you compare poetry to? That's one question. I'll give you an escape hatch here too. And that is, what writer have you cosplayed in your own work? So what writer at any point in your life have you just kind of brought into your own writing and written through them to some great degree? And I'd love to hear about that as well. So those are two questions that I have. Whoever wants to answer. If you don't want to answer them, you can ask each other a question.
I'll go first. What is poetry like, or what's a comparison? Was that the question?
Yeah, if you were asked to compare poetry to something, what would that something be?
I think it's funny. I think because poetry, this is really maybe a cop-out, but for me, because poetry is language and the material of our consciousness itself is language, you could almost pick any human experience. I will often have the thought, oh, that's like poetry, or that's like poetry, or that's like poetry. Because my first thought that came to mind is really stupid, would be like being an athlete, sports. Now, it's like not maybe what you would expect a poet to say, but I think the fact, how you have to be in the moment when you're on an athletic field, the pressure of scrutiny of people watching. It's not something you do in private, although you write in private. If you publish poetry, there's a level of I've got to be completely focused in here and be okay with what's going on and ignore everything. But then I have to put it into an arena of some degree. And even if only one person reads your poem, it's still got an effect of being watched and a performance kind of pressure. And I think surfing or skydiving or I don't know. I even think of it as like walking. I feel like if you just like, if you read poetry a lot, especially if you read like journals of kind of like conventional poetry, almost every poem is someone saying, here's a metaphor for what poetry is like. I took my dog to the vet is like a poem, or I had to bury my relative, it was a poem, it's like a poem. So in that sense, I feel like it's a cop-out answer, but if you told me, Jordan, here's something random, now tell me how it's a metaphor for poetry, or how poetry is like that, I feel like you'd all, if you're a poet, you'd probably figure it out. You'd probably find an answer. The second question, who have I channeled or written through? There was a time when there's a poet named Chelsea Minnis, and I would like read her poems obsessively and just completely rip off her forms that she used, the kind of long list poems full of images. I feel like my poems don't really look like hers on the page, but there was a time when I tried to write ones that did, and ultimately her like long lists of kind of riffing on images that are provocatively stupid or beautifully lyrical yet cutting. I still love that. It's still like, it's very hard for me to write anything that's not that. So that'd be my answer.
That's awesome. I mean, I'm definitely with you on the like anything could be poetry, and I'm like not a sports person at all, but I skateboarded a little bit in college, and then a few years ago, my son had a skateboard, and I was like, well, I want to see if I can still do a trick. So I tried to do an ollie on it, and it was like some cheap board, and I broke it. So I had to go buy him a new board. And I was like, oh, I'll buy a board. So I started skating again. And it's a little bit of a tense point between my wife and I, because I keep injuring myself sometimes significantly. But I got to a point where I'm okay enough that I can do a few things and I can find my way around a skate park. And it became extremely important to me, especially during the pandemic, because every day after work, logging off Zoom, I would go to the skate park, and it was the only thing I could do that absorbed all my attention, both mentally and physically. Because if my mind wandered, I would fall, and like some falls are okay and some really hurt. And it's the only thing I can, that it's like, it's the only thing that absorbed me like writing a poem does. Like it's very hard to find anything else that can absorb me. I'm a little bit ADD that way. But I think the others, I've tried to talk about this a lot, and I've not done a very good job of it, but I think stand-up comedy and poetry are essentially the same thing. They're just kind of, poets are typically trying to be sad and make you do that like thing that people do at readings. And comics are sometimes coming from a very sad place and trying to make you laugh, right? Like we're trying to get a sound out of the audience, and we're doing it through language. And there's so much crossover with compression of language, timing, punchline, for lack of a better term. In a poem, like you generally speaking, you've got to have those few lines that really just like, whoa, they kind of make all the other lines suddenly make sense or see them differently. And you can have several of them in a poem. But I've personally never encountered a group of people other than, like, to me, watching two stand-up comics talk to each other about stand-up comedy, or talk to each other about comedy, which if you know any comics, like they're obsessed about it. Like it's all they talk about. And the way they dissect their craft and sort of like live in it. And it's kind of the way they talk about it is its own language unto itself. That's weirdly comedic. I've only ever experienced that level of conversation with poetry. So I think the way that the two types of artists talk to each other is very similar. There's a couple, I know people sometimes have mixed feelings about it, but there's a couple episodes of that Seinfeld show, Comedian in Cars Getting Coffee. I think there's one with Kevin Hart where they're just sitting like talking about how they compose jokes. And Kevin Hart pulls out his phone and he's got a note on it that just says, I want to talk about my kids. And it'll just go riff, right? And like Seinfeld is like, oh my God, I love that. And I feel like, at least to a lot of poets I know, like we all have phones, we're all just jotting down stuff all the time. And it's kind of a way of like, you jot down this line and it's kind of saying like, okay, I want to come back to this later and see where this goes, see what happens. It's our version of, I want to talk about this. What was the other question? Oh, poets we channel. I have this thing where like, it's, whenever I'm reading or hearing really great poetry, I wind up writing. So I guess in that sense, and it can be a little problematic at reading, especially when readings were in person. So I constantly be on my phone writing stuff down. So I guess in that sense, I channel anyone that ever like really strikes a chord with me. But I think in a lot of ways, I channel, in this book specifically, I was channeling a lot of Kate Greenstreet. If any of you guys remember her, she had these really wonderful prosy, fragmented, sort of narrative-y books circling around some great catastrophes of some sort, like I think Young Tambling was one of them. And I just knew Kate as well. And she is, I assume, I haven't seen her or heard from her in years, but just a really, really remarkable person. I was really thinking about Claudia Rankine's Don't Let Me Be Lonely and Maggie Nelson's Bluets when I was writing this book. But I think at one point when I was young and trying to fit, like in grad school, I wound up in this really extensive email correspondence with Franz Wright, which, as you can imagine, can get a little intense and weird sometimes. But it was so, so important to me. And he was one of the first contemporary poets, like him, and I think maybe William Stafford and Dennis Johnson, that just sort of like made me go, oh, you could do this in poetry. So I think to a certain degree, I'm really kind of always channeling Franz, just because that influence, that impact he had on me, and then that kind of like, I think it was like a year or so of kind of intense correspondence.
No, that's great. I loved you. I didn't think your answer was a cop out at all, Mark. And I think that Justin, what you were saying about comedy as well, this unbelievable attention that's required, and then this type of kind of freedom to reach an incongruity, or this crossover of elements that wouldn't be perhaps allowed in if you were in the state of concentration all the way through. I think that's something that I think poetry does really well. It's this kind of, it lets nothing in for a moment and then it lets everything in. The aperture kind of goes open and then shuts and goes open and shuts. I have another question I've been asking just everyone who's read virtually for this series. And that is, since the pandemic, what is one thing that you can think of off the top of your head that you've either read or that you've listened to or that you've watched that has brought you a lot of joy? And it doesn't have to be one thing. It can be like 3 or 4 things that come to mind. If it was like a podcast or an album or a book of poetry or a novel, whatever it may be, just what are some things that you could share for others that you could create this kind of list of potential joy, is another question that I've been asking everybody. And so that it can be anything. Again, it could be some show on Netflix. It could be a visual artist. But
Okay.
yeah, I'd love, yeah.
Okay, here's my answer. And I also want to revisit just the previous question for 1 second. I think the question of what is poetry like, listening to you guys talk and thinking more about it, it made me think, if poetry can be anything, it can be like anything, or like, I still believe that you can almost pick, dramatic acting, or you could pick any human activity and you could find some truth in it, and how it is like poetry. So I like to think of the question. I think an interesting question is, what are things that we don't want poetry to be like, or what are things that that we wouldn't expect poetry to be like? What are the most unexpected things to compare and to say, like, no, poetry really is like this, like picking your nose, it really is like that. Writing a poem is that. It perfectly describes it. It's kind of embarrassing, it's kind of satisfying, it's kind of gross, it's physical, it's material, whatever. But I think that just in terms of that question, if seeking out comparisons to poetry or analogies for it that are weird or surprising is always fruitful. And anyway, moving on to your second.
Wait, no, one question. Can I go back to that for a second with you?
Yeah.
Do you think that's probably one of the things that limits poetry a lot of times, is that we as poets repeat just forms over and over and over, and we kind of say, this is, you said, well, this is not really a sonnet anyway. I mean, it's got 14 lines. It has, some structure, but is that part our fault as well? Is that we have maybe a limitation in imagining what a poem could look like on a page, or what it could function as, and we just kind of go back to these little lines and we go back? Or is that just the limitations of language itself? Because I really wonder that, because I see that, damn, the villanelle will never go away, but so I wonder, is it something that we do to ourselves, that we kind of limit what we define poetry to be? Because I don't know.
It's a good question. I think that individual poets, I don't really are to blame. I don't think are that really to blame, because maybe there's poets out there who only think in terms of old forms and stick to them, but they don't tend to be read, I don't think, for very widely. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, let's say 90% of poets only write in these rigid forms and they only make the most boring comparisons. Well, all you need is like a couple other poets to not do that, and
Yeah.
I think it's an okay ecosystem, like, so. But yeah, I do think when I read a poem that's boring, it's usually because the person is trying to squeeze some poetry juice out of a thing that's had all the juice squeezed out of it already, or like I've already tasted and smelled that song and dance. So I do think the comparisons that go outside expectation, and maybe even be like, might cause people to raise their eyebrows and be confused as to why that comparison would be made, would be an interesting poem. Unfortunately, those are the hardest ones to write and to make not be hard to listen to, or to make someone not hate them. So there's no easy, like, oh, just be wild and it'll be
Right.
all, you'll be lauded. It's not really the case. So, but yeah, it's, I don't, yeah, that's my answer. No more. No more. What was your, oh yeah, things we recommend.
Yeah, that's brought you joy.
Brought me joy. It's a tough question, because maybe what brings me joy might bring somebody else pain. I'm not sure. But
That's the risk. That is the risk.
I feel like I talk about this to everybody in every conversation, but I really love the novels of Philip Kerr. And he's got he writes detective mysteries set in Nazi Germany with a non-Nazi German private detective. and he's trying to solve crimes. He's very hard boiled, and this guy is the protagonist, this detective. His name's Bernie Gunther. He's just he's like the smartest smartass. He'll just say anything to anybody, and the lines are hilarious. He'll insult, and he's going up against these Nazis. So like you really are in dangerous territory. But ultimately what makes the books bring me joy is that they confront things like, where does evil come from? Why does society become this completely sick and murderous? And these novels dig into that, but with a very entertaining and I think readable and profound literary treatment. So it brings me joy because when I look at the regular world or the real world, I'm very confused by all the evil or the sickness and I don't know, just the bad things that are part of our world. And reading someone describe even worse situations and how moral courage is possible even in those places, even for a horrible human being, which the main character is. He's an awful person in some levels, but he's still a hero because he has kind of moral conviction or courage in these really dire situations. So that really gives me joy, it gives me hope, it gives me but it's not like an easily won, it's like a hard won hope, which gives me even more joy. Philip Kerr. I'm writing it down in the chat, so you don't have to.
I put a link to the his website.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark. No, thank you. Justin, what about you?
Oh God. I was so desperate to probably I assume like a lot of us. I'd never watched the show Community. So I started watching that. And the chemistry between the actors, especially Troy and Abed, and Troy is played by Donald Glover, and I can't remember who Abed's played by, but like there's some serious improv going on there, I'm pretty sure. So it brought me joy to watch at least what I want to believe is chemistry between those actors. I really like, if you show me a show with chemistry, I'll totally fall for it. I don't care. Mm-hmm. I don't care about anything else. Like if it feels to me like the actors are really having fun and there's chemistry there, I'll just watch the crap out of it. I got really into it. It's a weird one to say joy, but it brought me so much something, I don't know, not comfort, identification maybe. Like I really liked the Parable books by Octavia Butler, Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents. Especially like at that time, it was the realities were really close, unfortunately. What was the other one? Oh, Ursula Le Guin's The Dispossessed. I got into science fiction, basically. Like science fiction, I was always kind of into it. Like I was a Star Wars nerd, like I like sci-fi movies, but I'd never really read science fiction books. So I kind of just started, I wanted a different world, even if it was something that was meant to just be a metaphor or analogy for our own world. Like I wanted a different world. And it was the only thing I could concentrate on. Like I tried to read poems. I just couldn't do it. Like I think a lot of us really suffered from this like incredible lack of ability to concentrate on anything. So that helped me a lot. And the John Wick series, because it's such like gratuitous, over the top, absurd martial arts and violence, and just like it does not take itself seriously in the least. And I just love that. And I'll also give a plug for Bianca Stone's Ruth Stone House podcast. She had one
Yeah.
episode in particular for me that was just so amazing. It was with interviewing, I believe, Ted Dodson about his book in Orange. And it was just like, it was my birthday. I decided to take the day off of work, and I spent the day alternating between listening to that podcast and just like writing this like 4 or 5 page poem that was coming out of listening to that podcast. And it was like the best experience ever. But I love the way she talks to poets about poetry, because it's just a conversation.
Right.
Like she goes deep. She goes really deep, and you feel very seen as a poet. And just listening was there. There was also one about like how to put together a manuscript that she talked about with a friend of hers. That was just like, I mean, I recommend it for anyone struggling with a manuscript, or especially struggling with a manuscript for the first time. But also, again, just that like process, like, how do I do this? How do I deal with this problem that you might not think anyone else is dealing with, but they're the kind of problems we're all dealing with when we're trying to put a book together.
No, that's great. Thank you. Thank you both. Yeah, I was just thinking about, and before we sign off, I was thinking about, like Mark, what you were saying too, about this kind of dystopic landscape perhaps of Kerr's work. And I got really drawn into Adam Curtis's documentaries and like Can't Get You Out of My Head, that 6-part series of just watching, these explanations of how our politics got the way they are, how the world became this network of a series of disasters in many ways. But there's something, about the way that Adam Curtis gives you that structure so you can make sense of things, that was very reassuring to me. And so I get that someone kind of who doesn't seem like that they are giving up by any means. They're just going closer and closer to things that came together in some pretty nefarious ways. Anyway, I was just saying, I know we went over, but I want to thank you both for being here. I want to thank the audience for being here as well. I'll take a break for December, and then in January, it's probably going to be KCAI creative writing majors who are going to read, and then I'll start back up in February with some visiting writers. So anyway, if you're curious about following along, I'm still on the Disgusting Facebook. You can find a Common Sense reading series there, and you can join the group, or you can follow me on Instagram, and I post about readings there as well, or my website. But anyway, thank you everybody. Thank you to our readers tonight, Justin and Mark, and everybody be well, be safe out there, and I hope to see you again. And I hope to see you guys, in person very soon.
Yes,
You too, Jordan. Thank you
likewise.
so much.
Thanks,
Justin.
everyone. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Everyone.
And everyone who came in.
Have a lovely evening.
Yeah, thank you everybody. Take care. Have a good night.
Adios.
Bye-bye.
Bye.